Well, for those of you that were able to be here right at the top of the hour, thank you for joining us. As you can see on the screen and from our invitation, we wanted to present on a year-long effort to develop a ADA paratransit demand forecast model. We've been working on this for many months, so we're grateful to bring to you the nearly completed project and show how it will be relevant to perhaps your own planning activities or riding activities if you're using specialized or ADA paratransit services. Bruno, if you could go to the next slide. We're going to be talking very briefly, since we only have an hour and so much to cover, about the study as a whole, the overview, and how we developed this model. Priscilla from SCAG will talk about SCAG's regional transportation planning efforts and give some project background about why we even launched this study. Then Bruno Pennant of HDR, who is the project lead, will be sharing a tool overview. He'll explain the methodologies and the factors and give a brief example of how the tool can be used. Then Heather Menninger of Alma Transit Planning, we're some consultants to HDR on this project, will share some other key findings from the study. There were many different factors that went into developing the tool, and she'll share how those have relevance. And finally, we'll finish with questions and answers. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to put those into the chat box, and I'll make sure we get to those at the end or throughout if it's something we need to address immediately. So if you go to the next slide, please, Bruno, thank you. And one more. I'll just share a bit about the study. SCAG launched this tool project to develop a user-friendly spreadsheet-based tool. So it's Excel-based, so it can be used by anyone. And the goal is to forecast ADA paratransit demand in the SCAG region through 2045. And as Bruno will detail, it can be used by other specialized senior and disabled transportation providers as well. So not just ADA, but it was built on it with a focus of ADA paratransit. The tool was developed through a literature review. Bruno's team looked through 30 years of international literature on modeling to help develop the factors that would drive this tool. Additionally, we did interviews with selected ADA paratransit providers. We spoke with the 7 largest operators in the SCAG region, about 1 per county. And with them, we talked about their eligibility, their innovations, and their data, of course. Then we use that data provided by the agencies or from the NTD to fuel the tool. The data we used was 3 years, from 2015 through 2017. And in most cases, it was provided by the agencies themselves in order to make sure it was ADA only and not a conglomeration of all the demand response data. And we looked at things like trip provided and trips requested, no-shows, denials, and their total number of participants. And finally, we used SCAG's most recent socioeconomic projections as one of the factors in the tool, and Bruno will detail that in more length in a few moments. So with that, I would like to invite Priscilla to share briefly about the project background and SCAG's long-range planning efforts.
Thanks, Valerie. So just to provide some background on how we initiated this study, I wanted us to reflect a little bit on some of the themes related to Connect SoCal, which is our regional transportation plan, which was recently adopted. So one of the key goals of Connect SoCal is to increase mobility choices for people in our region. As you can see on this slide, among all the other goals that we have. And to support this particular goal of increasing or improving mobility choices, the intention is to improve and enhance the mobility systems and increase connections with transit as a backbone. We want to build a better transit network, looking at embracing mobility innovations to make it easier for people to get around without the personal or social and environmental cost of a car. And if you can move to the next slide, please. So in order for us to understand some of the current conditions, we looked at data and trends from the National Transit Database, also known as NTD. And the data shows that from 1991 to 2016, demand response trips in the SCAG region grew by 71%. And during this period, service provided increased fourfold, which represents about 20% of all the transit service hours or vehicle revenue hours that were reported in 2016. And I wanted to point out that in 2017 and 2018, which would have been the most recent data that I'm sure a lot of you will be thinking we will be using, we did not use those totals because the NTD data are very similar with the 2016 data that we're currently showing on the slide. And to note that overall transit ridership at that time has been declining rapidly. So SCAG projects that by 2045, the region's population of persons aged 65 or older will be 4.6 million, which is about 21% of the total population. Next slide. So our purpose for initiating this study is that the tool will support and inform our planning activities. We hope that we'll be able to use this tool to focus and analyze our regional long-range demand for ADA paratransit services. And to be able to measure the performance of plans in meeting mobility needs of our elderly and disabled residents in the region. And finally, we hope that this tool will help us to identify resources necessary to meet the future mobility needs. And all these are part of our efforts to support our Connect SoCal goal, as I mentioned earlier on, of increasing mobility in the SCAG region. And with that, I want to pass it over to Bruno from HDL to dive into the tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. And good afternoon, everybody. So the main goal of the tool is to forecast ADA paratransit demand through 2045 in the SCAG region. But the tool can also be used by SCAG and by other users for other reasons, such as market analysis. For instance, you can use the tool to figure out the total potential paratransit demand in your service area. That is, the number of people, who would be interested in your service before they start the certification process. The tool can also be used for policy scenario analysis. So, for instance, you may want to know what will be the impact on paratransit operations and trip requests in particular of a change in the reservation window. That's something that you can analyze with the tool. The tool can also be used for planning purposes. Obviously, that's probably the main reason you would want to use the tool. So, for instance, you could use the tool to find out the number of vehicle trips in your service area, in 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years from today. And finally, the tool can be used for budgeting purposes. Very often when we develop ADA paratransit demand projections, they are used by paratransit operators for budgeting purposes. They need those numbers to figure out how much it's going to cost in the future to provide the service, and from there they can derive how much funding will be needed to provide the service. So in fact, the tool can be used not just for forecasting ridership, but also to forecast capacity needs and budgeting requirements. and I will show you that in the tool in just a moment. The tool is the central piece of the study. We also prepared a number of other deliverables on paratransit operations data and trends, on forecasting methodologies, stakeholder interview findings. We also collected data from the US Census Bureau and also socioeconomic projections from SCAG. So, you know, all this information was used to develop the tool, and most of it actually made its way somehow into the tool. So this is the methodology that we implemented for this tool. The methodology is represented by means of flowcharts, which makes it easier for everyone to understand the methodology. So you can see this is actually a screenshot of one of the worksheets in the tool that describes the methodology. And so you can see that there are 3 flowcharts, one for each methodology. Again, you have one flowchart for paratransit demand, one flowchart for capacity needs, and one flowchart for budgeting requirements. Each flowchart shows the different steps to arrive at the forecast results. And at each step,
Bruno, we just lost you.
yes.
There, maybe you're back.
Okay, sorry. So I was saying that each chart shows the different steps to arrive at the forecast result. And at each step,
Bruno, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it only my audio, but you're coming in and out of a tin can? Are others having difficulty hearing Bruno?
Yes, I am also.
Okay, so let me call in. Hopefully that will solve it.
I'm sorry, everyone. We thought we had this problem licked, but apparently not quite.
Okay, can everyone hear me now? Sorry about this. Can everyone hear me?
That sounds much better.
Better.
Okay, sorry about this. So let me.
We have lost the screen. You'll need to share screen again. Can you do that?
Yeah, I'm taking care of it now. Okay, can everyone see the model methodology
Yes.
slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So before this interruption, I was starting to describe the these flowcharts that graphically represent the methodology that we implemented to forecast transit demand, capacity needs, and budgeting requirements. So each chart shows the different steps to arrive at the forecast result. In the first chart on the left-hand side, the output is passenger trips. In the middle chart, the output is the total vehicle fleet. And in the right-hand side chart, the output is the initial capital cost. And at each step, the inputs and the intermediate outputs are clearly identified. You have rectangular shape for all the inputs, and you have oval-shaped boxes for all the outputs. And all those boxes are linked, so you can see how they interact with each other. And so basically, each flowchart shows the whole process to arrive at the forecast results. So not only can you visualize all the inputs, but you can also see the where in the process these inputs are required. I want to talk a little bit about the organization of the tool. The tool was developed in Microsoft Excel. It's a standalone model, and by that I mean that it's one single Microsoft Excel file. There are no links to external files or online databases. It's just one file with all the information needed to use the tool. So the tool consists of a total of 11 worksheets that are logically organized from left to right with color-coded tabs, as you can see on the screen here, to help you navigate the tool. So, for instance, the blue tabs are for the preliminary section of the tool, mostly the table of contents. The green tabs are for the overview and the methodology. And then the orange tabs are the most critical worksheet of the tool. This is where you can read the instructions on how to use the tool. This is also where you can input your own data, your own values. And obviously, this is where you can see the outputs in terms of paratransit demand projections and capacity needs projections and budget requirements projections. And then the purple sheets are for all the data that are used in the calculations, including data provided by the ADA paratransit operators, demographic data that we collected from the U.S. Census Bureau, additional data on paratransit operations from the National Transit Database, and finally, projections, socioeconomic projections from SCAG. And these are the projections that are used for the most recent projections used for the regional transportation plan. I just mentioned that one of the critical worksheets in the tool is the sheet where you can input all the assumptions and see the calculation. I want you to pay particular attention to the far right column that you can see on the screen. This is where you can enter your own inputs. In fact, that worksheet, as I will show you in a moment, is protected. So if you're trying to change the calculations or the intermediate outputs or perhaps the output name, Microsoft Excel will prevent you from doing that. So this is just a safety measure to make sure that the integrity of the calculations, the integrity of the tool is protected. So with that, let me share with you the tool. So again, there are 11 worksheets in total, logically organized from left to right. I just showed you the table of contents, so I will stop there. You also have a description that provides an overview of a tool that explains, what the tool does and how to use it. The methodology was just described, but it's there if you would like to have a better understanding of, how we arrive at a specific step in the forecasting process. There are also detailed instructions, step by step, that you can follow. The steps are numbered, and at each step, there is a description of the inputs required. There is a description of the output, a description of the data source, the key factors that have an impact on the output at that step, and also a description of the process of the calculations that are being made. I want you to pay attention to these two columns that I'm selecting, the data source and the key factors. If you look at the data source, you will see that in most cases, the agency is the data source. So that means two things. One, obviously, you should have access to this information since we use data from the agencies to populate the model. And two, it means that you're familiar with this data, with those variables, and therefore that should help you understand how the model works. There are only two steps where we need data outside of the agency, and I'm talking about the socioeconomic projections from SCAG in particular. And then the next step, and I'm going to spend the remainder of my time for this presentation on this slide, on this worksheet. This is the worksheet where you can see all the calculations. This is where you can see all the intermediate outputs and the final outputs. And this is where you can make some changes to the default values, the assumptions that are made in the tool. Again, some cells are protected so that you cannot modify them. This is to make sure that the integrity of the tool is not affected. But all the cells that are highlighted in orange can be modified. So the very first step for you when you use the tool is, of course, to define the forecast period. You want to define the first year of the analysis and the last year of analysis. It could also be the same year. The first year of analysis could very well be the last year of analysis if you're interested in forecasting the demand or capacity needs for a particular year in the tool. And then the next selection that you need to make is, the scope of the analysis. Do you want to generate the projections of the whole SCAG region, or for a particular region, county, or for a particular system? So you have that ability to do that in the tool, and based on your selection, you're going to see that all the default, or most of the default values are going to change. And that's because we try to customize the tool as much as possible and get data at a very granular level. So the outputs are shown in column E, which I just selected, and the default inputs are shown in column IJ. And again, you have the ability to override these inputs in column K and L. So let me give you a few examples here. So let's assume that you're planning a substantial fare increase, so say a 20% fare increase next year, and you want to know what will be the impact on demand, but you're not sure exactly how to conduct that scenario. So the first thing to do here is to look at the instructions and find out in the key factors column where the fare is located, and it's located here at step number 6. So what that means is that any change in the fare structure, whether it's a fare increase, decrease, or perhaps a new fare category, will have an impact on the output at that step, which is the total trip request, and obviously all the outputs following step number 6. But it won't have any impact on all the previous steps, including the number of active registrants, the number of people applying for the Paratransit, to give you a few examples. So you know that if there is any change, it needs to be made here at step number 6. So step number 6 is the input is an average annual number of trip requests per active registrant. The default here is 108 trips. So if you increase the fare because of the inverse relationship between the fare and ridership, you can expect that number will go down. By how much? Well, based on the literature and based on the project that I worked on, the fare elasticity, which is a measure of the sensitivity of ridership to changes in the fare, typically the fare elasticity is between minus 0.2 and minus 0.35. So what that means is that if you increase the fare by, say, 10%, you can expect a decline of at least 2.7% in ridership. So in this particular case, you can expect that number that I'm showing here to go down by, if we have a 20% increase in the fare, we can expect a 5% approximately a decline in the number of trip requests. So in this case, we can expect that number to go down to 102 trips per year on average and per registrant. And you can see that once you enter that number here, all the numbers below step number 6 are automatically adjusted. Okay, and again, none of the numbers above step number 6 are affected, which makes sense. So you can see here very quickly again, once you know approximately what is the impact of the fare increase on ridership, you can figure out what's going to be the impact on the total number of passenger trips, and from there, the impact on the other metrics. Let me give you another example. So let's assume that you have a no-show policy, but it's not enforced. You want to enforce it, to reduce the number of no-shows, because obviously any no-show is a dead loss to the agency. That's a trip that basically is not made, but it, in reality, in terms of cost, there is no change as if the trip had been made. So you can expect that no cancellation and no-show rate to decline significantly once you want to enforce your no-show policy. By default here, based on the data that we collected from Omnitrans, the cancellation and no-show rate is 6%. By enforcing the no-show policy, let's assume that we can expect that number to go down by 4%. So same thing here, you go to column KL, you select the cell corresponding to step 8, and you enter the your inputs. So let's assume here that the no-show rate is the cancellation and no-show rate is gonna go down to 4%. If I enter 4%, you can see that the output for step number 8 has just been updated. None of the outputs above were affected, and there are also some outputs that are updated below step number 8. One final example, earlier I was talking about the impact of a change in the fare structure on paratransit demand. Obviously, a change in the fare structure will also have an impact on your average fare per trip. And this, the average fare per trip is used in the model to estimate the budgeting requirements. So here, for Omnitrans, by default, we have an average fare per passenger trip of $4. If we increase the fare by 20%, we can expect that number to go up by 80 cents. So the new average fare per passenger trip will be $4.80. And you will see that when you enter that number, you can expect some changes in the outputs here in column E. So again, one of the strengths of these tools is that it can allow you to run a number of scenarios, and you can see very quickly with very few model inputs what will be the impact of your scenario. And again, if you're not sure, where in the tool, at what step you should be conducting your scenario, go to the instruction sheet, take a good look at the column F, the key factors, and you will be able to identify the step where you should be conducting your scenario. Let's go back to the presentation now. And I believe Heather is going to take over.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you very much. I hope you all will agree that this is a relatively straightforward and I believe rather elegant model that even people like myself and Valerie, who are not technical people, can embrace and consider. I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about some of the opportunities that became identified. As Bruno acknowledged, there were a lot of elements that went into this study. Some of these opportunities are ancillary to the model. Some of them are directly an outgrowth of the model. In our interviews with 7 of the largest and across the region, the ADA complementary paratransit providers, we saw a great difference in diversity, obviously in terms of size and scale, and in terms of organization, whether they directly operate or contract for service, whether they use a mix of dedicated vehicles and taxis, certainly differences in terms of eligibility processes and the volume of riders moving through that, as you see here on this chart on the right of ADA applicants across those 3 years for which we gathered data. But we saw, in addition to the differences in how people approach this law, some commonalities and some opportunities out of that. One of them relates to the fact that all of these operators are using the same software technology, PassWeb, albeit different versions of it, but there may be some opportunities around both training and otherwise associated with that. And while there were certainly differences in eligibility processes, there was much commonality obviously all responding to the same law, but some best practices that perhaps could be shared among the operators. Again, in a training environment, there's a lot of turnover among some young staff and opportunity there. We heard about some technology innovation in policy and procedure. I'll speak a bit to that in a moment. And we began to open some conversations about rider policies and communications as we think about, well, I don't know if we're going to have a post-COVID world or continuing to live with COVID world maybe, but some opportunity to explore and develop those communication tools. So all that suggested to us that SCAG with its advisory group, RTAC, is in an excellent position to help foster some of this kind of collaborative exploration of both compliance with and best practice implementation of the ADA complementary paratransit law. And furthermore, to think about the tool that Bruno has been presenting as a tool, one in which you can test scenarios. Next slide, please. So thinking about testing scenarios, and as Bruno suggested, their implications for ridership demand, for vehicle capital capacity, and for budgetary needs. This is a quick summation of some of the kinds of technology and innovations we heard about in our interviews with the operators. Several related to impacting the rider experience, thinking about these customer-facing technologies, whether they're on a smartphone in the rider's hand or on a desktop computer that she may be using. Where's my ride, to find out where that vehicle is and how many minutes I need to wait for it, and online trip reservations, including canceling trips. We heard about innovations that directly impact the rider's experience. One is a very cool accessible traveler app under development by LA Access that through Bluetooth technology links the rider with the bus stop and the rider with the vehicle. And in environments, for example, they're testing it in the Rancho Los Amigos rehabilitation multi-acre campus where bus stops are kind of hither and yon. That opportunity to directly connect riders, buses, and bus stops is an important innovation. Fare policy was another area that impacts the trip experience. LA Metro's free fares for certified ADA riders has increased use of fixed route by those individuals, some buddy traveler fare policies in place as well. And finally, there were innovations related to accessing different services, travel training, where Riverside Transit Agency has had the flagship travel training program in place, but there were training experiences in multiple operators. Helps encourage ADA certified riders or people in the funnel for ADA certification to consider a fixed route and help them develop confidence in that. And finally, innovations around beyond the ADA supplemental transportation. These are the community-based human service agency providers. They may be Lyft and, whoops, we lost the presentation. They may be Uber and Lyft voucher coupon programs or taxi voucher programs. These beyond the ADA providers support more choice, as Priscilla spoke to, one of SCAG's goals for the region. So thinking about those innovations and moving then to my last slide, I wanted to present some of these innovative opportunities in relation to Bruno's model. And so what you're seeing here on the left is a particular innovation or policy or practice. That first light column are the key factors that Bruno spoke to in his instructions page, where he talked about the array of factors that both grew out of the literature review as well as our interviews with the operators. And then the input name, that's from that user input override column. I call it Bruno's orange column. That's the column where you can make changes. And then here we see in the final column the impact that a given change to the input factor may have on that key factor. So looking at this a little bit more specifically, for example, in terms of that customer-facing rider notification, where's my ride, where the rider determines where her vehicle is, how close it is to arriving at her stop. So I suggest that this impacts three key factors here in that first column: the quality of service, the productivity, and cancellation no-show rates. So the quality of service goes up, and that may contribute to more annual trips requested where the rider has confidence that the vehicle is coming, that it's near, that she's going to make that trip. Similarly, productivity goes up. If the rider knows the vehicle is coming, she can be out there ready to jump on the vehicle or board the vehicle. It decreases dwell time, increases the number of trips per hour the single vehicle can make. And finally, it decreases cancellation no-show rates. If the rider has confidence that in fact that vehicle will come, she's not going to sort of quickly try to organize an alternative ride because she's given up hope that her vehicle will show. And so we hope it can decrease no-show rates. A second example relates to online rider trip reservation, where you can make your trip request through your computer or on your smartphone, and you don't have to go through the telephone system to make that trip request. These both, by the way, are PassWeb modules, dollars associated with these modules, but nonetheless available to through the software that all the operators we interviewed have access to. So this online rider trip reservation innovation, we believe will decrease the annual operating and maintenance costs and decrease cancellation no-show rates. Again, where the rider has confidence in using the service, they'll be ready to board promptly, and that can help to decrease cost per trip. Similarly, it can increase the productivity and decrease the cost per trip in that manner as cancellation and no-shows decline. A third innovation related to that accessible traveler mobile app that we referred to, which as I said was under development. This can both impact the quality of service where the rider has confidence that the vehicle and the bus stop and the rider will all connect. That can increase productivity, and it can decrease annual operations and maintenance costs, the per trip cost associated with each individual trip where people board efficiently and vehicles don't wander around trying to figure out where that passenger may be waiting for them. The last three areas of innovation and of policy and procedure relate to how riders use services, what services they use, fare policies and fare structure to encourage use of fixed route, travel training to build confidence in using fixed route, and beyond the ADA, supplemental transportation services, including Uber, Lyft vouchers, taxi vouchers, and community-based organizations. These all create more choices for the rider. They have the potential to decrease the number of average annual trips requested and thereby have impact on those three main key factors and projections: total trips projected, the vehicle and capital costs associated with what's been projected, and of course the budget forecast as well. So these are some examples of the ways in which the tool can be used, opportunities we believe that can be tested at the individual operator level and looked at from a regional perspective as well. So that concludes my brief comments, and I think we will at this point pass it over to Valerie to see if we have any comments in the chat box and what questions may have presented or will present from our listeners. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
There are no chat box comments or questions yet, but perhaps there are some that people have been ruminating on. Feel free to ask away if you have any questions, or type if you prefer. We did breeze through that, so I understand if it was a lot all at once.
Maybe Priscilla and Philip could speak to the model availability and what you envision in terms of its use by participants who could be on the line.
Heather, this is Priscilla. So I think if we were anyone that's in any of the transit agencies that we had talked about earlier on, the plan is to share the draft and see if there are any comments. So some of you may have received it already. I believe Laurel was on the workshop last week, but for the others, I think this is basically information only for any of the SSTAC members. But as we mentioned earlier on, this is a tool that we envision would help us to focus our ADA demand when we need that for our SCAD planning purposes for the most part. So that's basically the big function of this tool that we're looking forward to.
Bruno, do you have any final comments you'd like to offer? I know that you designed this to be used by people of varying levels and familiarity with modeling practices. And as I indicated, Valerie and I did become comfortable moving around in it. Others will have much more experience. Do you have any?
Right. So, yeah. So one of the perhaps the biggest difficulty that we faced over the course of the study was to, develop a tool that can be used by as many people as possible. And obviously, you cannot satisfy everyone's or every agency's needs. So we try to find a good compromise. We try to develop a tool that is, fairly easy to use. And by that, I mean a tool that does not require, a lot of proficiency in Microsoft Excel or even any experience in forecasting or modeling, really. As I mentioned a few minutes earlier, there's really only one worksheet in the tool where you need to provide some information. All the other worksheets basically just show you the data that are being used in the calculations, and they also the other sheets provide information, detailed information on what the tool is doing and how to use it. At the same time, for people who have some experience in forecasting and modeling in general, I think the tool can still be useful to them because it can be quickly used to run some scenarios, and that's an ability that you may not have with other more sophisticated or complex tools. Really, it just takes a few seconds once you know what inputs are needed to run your scenario. It takes a few seconds to run it and see the results. Also, we advise those who have experience in modeling and forecasting. Yes.
Bruno, can I interrupt you for a second? We have a hand raised from Laurel, so I don't know if you want to address her comment. I mean, whatever questions or comments she has, and then you can move on.
Oh, sure.
Hi, thanks. This is Laurel. It's actually more of a, not necessarily, wanted that this tool looks really great. I'm really excited. Although we don't have any small transit from our on the line, it's definitely something that I would definitely want to share with them. What is particularly of interest to me is that it looks very user friendly, and in our county, we're really trying to make an effort to look beyond, the next 2 to 3 years in terms of financial planning. So I like that. I forget what tab it was on, but I like that it was actually looking out several more years. That it can help us, particularly for CPA level, to better sense of what projected cost. So I just want to do a great job, everyone, because it's something that we definitely would want to take back for our transit operators who don't necessarily have, the full capacity at times to do something like this on their own.
Bruno, Laurel is with the Commission, and we have 2 operators there. both Sunline and RTA. So the tool should be pretty robust in projecting Riverside County numbers.
Right. So we have, yes, we have information for Riverside County, and we also have information for RTA that was provided by RTA or collected from the NTD. And yeah, so to go back to the comment that was made, yes, it can be used for financial planning to figure out what are the capital costs in terms of vehicles. You know, we're not looking at other capital costs such as, you know, facilities that would be needed to, you know, to store the vehicles. But it does provide some information on the level of funding needed to purchase vehicles.
And if I can add an additional comment, both RTA and Sunline were part of this earlier process, so their data is in there, and they were on some operator training calls this week, so they currently have the tool and are being able to test it and make any comments before it's finalized in the distribution process that Priscilla spoke to. So it will definitely be specific to them, but as you mentioned, Laurel, the smaller other providers will also find this of great value, I imagine.
That's great news. Thank you.
This is Philip Lawaskag. Thanks, Laurel, for that input. It's really good to hear that that you find it will be useful. And what we will do after we get input on the tool and we finalize, we will make it available on our website along with the user manual. And we have recorded training that we will also make sure is available so that, you know, after this contract is over, we will have those resources for any operators that might wish to use the tool in the future.
Were there any other comments? I'm sorry I missed your hand for a while, Laurel, but I don't see any other raised hands now. Any other comments, questions? Well, with that, I think we should say good afternoon. We thank you all for spending an hour with us, letting us know about the project we're really proud of. And as Philip just said, we're working on finalizing it with transit operators, and then it will be available on the website. So we will let you all know how to access that when the final version is available in about a month, or a little less than a month.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you for your time.
Thanks,
Good.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.